Hey guys, welcome to another episode of Wisdom and Wealth. I am Corey. I'm sitting here with Carrie Helland, and this is a friend of ours, of my family's. Our kids go to school together, so I'm really excited about this. Has husband Josh, beautiful babies, Gigi and Cole, and I want to invite her on because this lady is kind of a big deal, right? Biotech, PhD, and legit just moved over here a couple years ago from San Fran, but I'm happy to have you back in Texas.
We're happy to be here.
Yeah.
And I don't have a PhD, but I
Oh, you
do
don't have,
have a
I'm sorry.
background.
I'm
Yes,
sorry. I took
yes,
that the wrong way.
that's
Okay. But your biotech is basically
Yes,
that. So,
yes,
well, I wanted to go off because we got talking before this, but you started telling me like the best story ever about how you ever came into biotech.
Yeah.
Start with that.
Yeah, so we were talking about how we're all kind of a product of our experiences. And for me, my journey into this profession started when I was 8 years old, when my dad was part of a life-saving clinical trial. And this is back in the 1980s. This was also at a time when the HIV crisis was just starting and spreading throughout the country. And as an 8-year-old, you see highlights on the news. And so I was very aware of what was going on. So observing that and then experiencing what my dad went through over a couple of years' time, I have a journal entry still from the 3rd grade when I was 8 years old where I said, I want to be a doctor and a scientist when I grow up and make new medicines and help cure diseases. And, lo and behold, that's what I've gone on to do. So call it divine or just, part of my life experience. Either way, it's been quite the journey.
That's awesome. That's cool. So coming in, you went to University of Kansas, go Jayhawks,
Yes,
right?
Rock Chalk.
You're a runner there, right? So sports is a big part of your background.
Yeah.
I know you and Josh have Olympics. We were just talking about some of the Olympics and how big that is in your life.
Yeah.
But before we get into that portion, how did you even, that started getting into biotech, but how did you get out to San Francisco? How did you get out to where you're at right now, or like you came back to Texas? And tell me some of the routes that took place there. And then if you don't mind, what I really appreciated from our previous talk was how you started talking about the lie that corporate America spits at women or people in general.
Yeah. So like I said, it's been a journey. So after undergrad, where I studied chemistry and biochemistry, I had been accepted for my PhD. And the summer between undergrad and starting that program, I had the opportunity to travel to Europe for the first time. And growing up in Kansas, with relatively simple means, my family didn't travel much growing up. I really hadn't seen any of the world at that point. And so it was like an eye-opening experience for me. And I came home and just decided I want to start my career. I want to start making money because I want to travel and have all these amazing experiences. And so I had $1,000 saved in the bank. I had a car that my parents had given me that I packed with all of my belongings. And I had some godparents that lived in Los Angeles at the time that I didn't know very well, but had called and asked them, could I come live with you while I try to get a job in biotech? And they said yes. So that was like one of those pivotal moments in my life because it truly changed the trajectory of my entire life. And so I drove out, I was able to live with them. That $1,000 went very quickly, but again, through the grace of God, I was given a job with a company called Amgen, which is a very large biotech company. Through some divine, meetings of people, I met, I think it was an ex-wife of my dad's fraternity brother who said I should talk to this person and then this person. And then by the 3rd person I spoke with, they said, oh, if you want to get a job at Amgen, you have to talk to this individual. And by that time, I had a job like 3 days later. And so that's where it all started. And spent the last 21 years working in that industry.
So there's a lot of people that wouldn't do that though. Yeah. Like that's a pretty powerful deal right there. Where you at least made a request or asked somebody for help, right?
Yeah.
Or
multiple people.
Multiple people, right? Yeah. So like, how did you even muster it up to think of who to ask on that? I guess. Is that natural to you?
There's some element of that. I've always kind of had a natural leadership quality. I've always just been strong-willed and had some of these attributes part of my personality. But I think it's just the importance of being willing to say yes to people. And that's what these people did for me. And so, kind of just chasing down that opportunity through conversations and just seeing where it leads. Yeah.
It's awesome.
Yeah.
Thank God for them, right?
Yeah. Yeah. Yeah.
Okay. Now, tell me, so you went to LA, San Francisco. These are hot spots for tech companies and for a lot of cool things that are going on, especially here in America. What you had commented before about the lie that corporate America, or the lie that speaks to women, or talk about that a little bit.
Yeah. So I definitely grew up, watching movies like everyone else did, and always aspired to be, the student body president and the captain of the team. And, I always envisioned myself going on to a big city and having a big corporate executive job and really being liberated in that way. And I've done all of those things, and it's been a wonderful journey, and it's nothing that I regret at all. But I think the lesson I learned along the way, once I got married and then started having kids, is that it's really difficult to have it all, and the vision that they show you in the movies of like the woman and the mother and the wife like doing everything. There's always trade-offs, and it's really hard. And I think it's, I kind of view it as a lie that gets fed to us. I think my experience in reality has just been different than what I envisioned, like in the movies. And that sounds kind of silly, but that's been my experience. And so, I value women that I work with tremendously, and have a lot more grace and appreciation for them, knowing how much they're trying to manage, if they do have a family and kids and these types of things, how challenging that is. And I understand why so many women do leave the workplace, right? Because you reach a point where it may not be worth it. It may not be worth the trade-off.
Yeah, that's tough. Well, so like now, what do you feel like the lie's been? Like, this is be independent. It's all you. You can go build everything yourself and have everything you want, or what's versus a dependent lifestyle with a husband or a partner or something, or what do you feel like it's being pushed there?
I mean, I think as a woman, you have to work really hard to achieve all of those things, really hard. And there have been women that have come before me that I've worked for and been grateful to work for them, that had it way harder than I did in terms of what they were having to overcome in the corporate world. But like I said, there's always trade-offs. When you have kids and you're a mom, they want your attention and they need your attention, right? And you could be in the middle of your workday, or you've got work coming in at all hours now that we're in this 24/7 work cycle. And like I said, there's just always a trade-off, and it can be challenging at times, right? So I think the vision that I had was like, oh, you can do it all, and you hire the support that you need, and you have this team around you. And life doesn't always work that way, right? So you can't outsource everything. You can't outsource being a mom.
No way. I love that. Yeah, thanks for sharing that. Okay. So as you're going through those, like, so naturally there's ebbs and flows to that, right? Like, as you're coming into maybe a heavy work season and you're trying to balance being there for your family, I mean, how do you manage that, or how do you even approach that? Are you proactive with that, or is it sometimes reactive, or how have you come to balance that to make sure you're there?
I think it's both, and I couldn't do it without my husband, right? He's an incredible support, and I don't think any successful woman out there can do that in the absence of having a loving and supportive husband that's willing to pick up a lot of the slack, which he does. And he has his own career, right, and his own demands, and so it is this constant management. He's an advocate of being proactive. I'm trying to get better about it, but it takes really good planning. And yeah, you can't be reactive, because that just leads to chaos, right?
Yeah.
So
yeah, that's good. No, I like that. I think I've heard a couple different arguments where there is this big push to be independent, right? And it's cool in its own regard, but it was framed one time where I'd heard from somebody else who were like, well, I could be independent if I want to, but why would I get married if that was the case?
Mm-hmm.
Why would I get married if I wanted to be independent? Because I could go pay for technically everything I wanted to, right? But in marriage, you're choosing to be dependent on somebody.
Mm-hmm.
Like I knew that's the other part of what I'm not, essentially. Kind of the opposites attract, right? And so that's one thing I've been thinking with my wife is she's the one who calls me out when I'm being a jerk.
Yeah.
She's like, stop acting like a jerk. And I'm like, I'm not. And she goes, yes, you are. All right. So now I gotta come back to that, right? But and so I really appreciate that. So all right, maybe somebody who's going into that situation, maybe it might be a young lady or it could be somebody else, but what do you see? I'm like, I mean, this is my own opinion. I feel like, especially you hear about like woman in a man's world or a woman in a man's space or vertical or whatever that is, where I feel like a woman can cut through just because of the giftings that we both have. A woman can cut through a man's field, you know, especially one who's put together and can hold herself really well. I mean, what if there was somebody in that space who's trying to come into that managing a family or coming into where you were at, like let's just say you were 10 years ago, coming into where you're at right now, what would you tell that person coming in right now?
I'm trying to think back to myself 10 years ago, right before having kids. I mean, maybe some of the points we just talked about, you know, there is always going to be trade-offs, you know, having it all may not mean what you think it does.
Yeah.
But I would encourage my younger self. I mean, there's nothing I would change, right? Continue to pursue your dreams, be a liberated woman, you know, like you can. I think one of the things I was told as a young kid, and it wasn't a specific individual, I was just kind of surrounded by this in my upbringing, was that I could become anything I wanted to be if I worked hard enough. I never felt a limitation because of where I was born, because of my gender, you know, any of these attributes. If I worked hard and was determined to do something, I could achieve it, right? And so I think giving that gift to anyone in your life, right, is foundational to future success. And I would tell women, you know, pursue it, but just have an expectation going into it that it may not be what you thought it was based on the movies you watched growing up, right?
Well, okay. Now, what's a big thing for you and Josh? Like, what's been the big thing for you guys to make sure, maybe even his proactive work that's been big for you guys to make sure? I mean, and I'll tell you, I guess where this question is coming from is, you know, I have folks both who are on their third marriages, and so naturally, like in America, we have an over 50% divorce rate. Now, a lot of that contributes because there's multiple marriages and divorces in people's lives. But I would like, what is somebody who's coming into a marriage or maybe even in a situation like that, whether you guys have been proactive into making sure we don't fall into that statistic?
Mm-hmm.
You know, is there something like Josh has been good at, or you guys collectively decided on, where you're like, this is where we stand, or what's gone into that?
Yeah, I mean, I think we were really blessed in the timing of when we met in our lives. We were both in our early 30s. I had kind of reached the point in my personal journey of thinking, you know, maybe I won't ever be married and I won't have a husband just because it's something I always dreamed of. Doesn't necessarily mean it's going to happen. And so I'd kind of come to that reality through my own process. And then we were actually set up on a blind date. So I do feel like there was something destined and kind of ordained, like in us coming together in that respect. We'd also lived a lot of our life. So we both had established careers. We both had that opportunity to kind of see the world. And we did a lot of that together in our first couple of years of marriage as well. But I think the other thing that's really been good for us is that professionally in our journeys, like our careers have taken different seasons at different times. So there's been times when he's taken risks and taken on some challenging things professionally. And it was at a time where I had a lot of stability in my career. And then things have the opposite has happened between us too. So I've been in a position where I could take more risk professionally when he has a lot of stability. And so it's been nice that like we're both not taking a lot of risk and instability at the same time, because that wouldn't be good for a family. And then I think just open communication. Obviously we have core values and faith in our family, and that's a part of our everyday life. And so coming together, in that respect, and making that the center of what, our family is all about, I think is really important as well.
Good. That communication, it's interesting. We're rereading a book right now as a team called Who Does What by When. And a big struggle for guys is communicating, right? Now, I know some ladies too, but generally I think it's more with guys. And in it was talking about how some obvious communication breakdowns were going on in the story that's in the book, and I'll let you read it. But it's basically like the lack of communication leads to all these assumptions. How am I supposed to know how you feel in a relationship? How am I supposed to know what you want from me if it's not clearly articulated, right? And so with that brings instability. And so what I really appreciate is the over communication, at least me taking personal responsibility, even if there was like a breakdown on the opposite side, maybe I didn't clearly articulate exactly what I wanted from you in that communication, right? And it was so good, but I think it's so critical. I mean, business and a marriage. I mean, if we don't, there's a lot of relationship breakdowns really fast if we don't say what we need or want. And so I think that's really good.
And don't be afraid to ask for help. I think therapy is great. Like Josh and I both did a lot of work on ourselves personally before we ever met. And so I think we were just really in a good place when we came together and had learned some of those skills from previous experiences. And so if you're in a relationship and you're struggling on these things, like, don't be too proud to ask for help,
Yeah, heck yeah. Okay, now come back to that risk part you were talking about. You had talked about, I think there's so many people in this world that are afraid to take a risk or do something or ask the question or reach out or do whatever it is that they're looking and even potentially called to do. John Maxwell's book, Questions, I forget the name of the book, it's just Questions book. He talks about how Thomas Edison was quoted saying, none of my inventions were my own ideas. There were other people that didn't act. Because I think a lot of people, any sort of action, there's some sort of big fear behind that, or laziness, whatever you want to call it, that some sort of explosion, good or bad, is on that end. Talk about the risk that you took, because there's a lot of people that think they're just conservative, right? But they may have taken some good risks or bad risks. But how has that paid off for you guys?
Yeah, I think. Well, it's the old adage where like opportunity meets preparedness. So being ready when opportunity presents itself in your life, and be ready to say yes. And the way that we've taken risks, I guess, professionally and in our careers is being willing to say yes to something that maybe there isn't a lot of clarity around what it's going to be, like jumping into a startup. And in our case, that meant jumping into a startup for me and moving our family to San Francisco from LA. When our daughter was young, and we didn't know what it was going to be like, but it's something we'd prayed about and both felt like it was what we were supposed to do. And, it really kind of set, again, you look back at these pivotal moments and you see how it's been very key in like your life's trajectory and how things have played out. And that was that for us. Yeah.
It's awesome. What do you think like a theme for you has been in your life?
Yeah, I would say be willing to take risk, be prayerful in it, right? And I would say, seek wisdom from others too when you're making big decisions, but also be prepared, right? So when opportunity meets preparedness, like you are ready to say yes and to step into something, and be willing to, right? It's when you open your heart and your mind, I think in that respect, it's just really wonderful. Like the people that you encounter and the things that you get to be a part of, it's like, you can't write this. Like, I don't know where my life is going. I don't, what the next opportunity might be, but then it turns into something beautiful. And like, you can look back and say, wow, like how the journey kind of plays out. Yeah.
Yeah. There's a cool proverb that says desire without knowledge is not good.
Mm.
and how reckless, hasty feet can be. And another word for desire was soul. A soul without knowledge is not good. And that was, it had hit me. That's been a reoccurring thing that's come back to me for the last several years. Is basically doing your due diligence, just understanding what the heck you're jumping into.
Yeah.
Right.
Yeah. And I will say, like, some of the risks that we've taken, we did that, right? Like, we knew what we were stepping into. Yes, I was stepping into a startup, but it was started with hundreds of millions in financing and with a leadership team that had previous successes. And so it wasn't, a startup that I'd never heard of where I was working for sweat equity or something like that. Like, there was some meat around the work that was going to be done, and you had the resources to really build something. So yeah, it's a risk, but it's an informed risk, I guess. You kind of knew what you were jumping into.
Yeah. Well, you immediately say meat, and I just want steak. But, but no, well, I think it's a big deal, right? I got into this conversation with my dad about my nephew jumping into a trade school, which would be really cool. But my immediate thought was like, okay, has he ever job shadowed any of these trades that he's looking at, or just gone an intern or whatever, and researched it before throwing a bunch of money at the school potentially, and realizing in 3 or 5 years that he hates it, and so and that's a demoralizing place too, right? If you're in a place, it's different if you're in an area with your wrong coach, wrong boss, or wrong team, but it's demoralizing, or it's a big deflator to be in a space that you just don't like at all, but knowing you've invested so much time, energy, and money, or time, energy, and money into that, right? And so there's the due diligence to see if there's a demand or need there, but also for yourself personally, it's like, do I even want this?
I think it's important to always have a vision. And I guess looking back on my life, I've always been a very visionary person in that regard. And maybe it starts with the foundation in athletics. Like, part of being a competitive athlete, like before a competition or a race, like you visualize being in that race. And for me, it was running around the track or being in the pool and swimming, and imagining like every step of that race or every length of that pool, how it's going to play out. And you apply the same principles to your life, going back to being inspired by, Hollywood movies about these career women that have these amazing successes, and really seeing that for myself, and having that vision that you're working towards. But again, like, I took steps even in high school. I was shadowing doctors in my hometown, or I was going to the local university and they had a research lab, and I was part of a program that gave you exposure to being inside of a lab. Taking those opportunities to kind of get a sense of like, is this really what I want to be doing? And having a vision. And I think you can apply that to your life personally too. Like, what is the vision for your family? Like, what do you want to create here? What experiences do you want to give your kids? What values do you want to teach them? Who do you want to surround them with? And I mean, that was part of our decision to move to Texas from California. I love California. I still identify as being Californian, like personally on the inside. I grew up in Kansas, but like that is really where my coming of age happened. And it's a beautiful place. But things in the last, 7 or 8 years just really kind of took a turn, and it wasn't a place where we felt safe for our family and for our kids. And it wasn't the vision, that I had imagined. I imagined raising my kids on the beach and them being surfers and playing beach volleyball and all of these wonderful things. And then you realize, what you imagined may not be the reality. And so we made the decision to leave and come to Texas, and here we are.
God bless Texas. Let's go.
It's been great. It's been a great ride. Yeah.
Good.
Yeah.
That's okay. We'll jump into this and turn the subject a little bit as we wrap up. So before we're coming into here, you've talked about how you've dove into your own personal finances a lot, right? Like we talk about, there's a lot of people that contract that out and hire someone to do that, but you've done it yourself. But there's so like, tell me what are like some obvious things for you today where you're like, this is something I did early on, or even something I did recently that has been really a good move for our family
Yeah.
that I would encourage other people to do.
Yeah. I think you have to take control of your finances. You have to teach yourself. You have to be intentional. And nothing will teach you that more than not having very much money. And I remember in my early days of living in California, 50% of the money that I made went to rent alone. I would get to the end of the month, and this is having, I was a scientist at a major company, but it was very expensive to live there. And I would get to the end of the month and I would have $5 in my bank account, right? And so that really pushes you, right, to do better. But I think some of the best advice I got from my dad was always, live within your means, which is hard at times, for sure. And, max out those retirement accounts early. If you're in a company that has a W-2 and a savings plan, and either it's a 401k or you can set up your own IRAs. You can set them up for your kids even, right? Like, be intentional and make sure that you're putting that money away when you're young. For me, that unlocked my ability to buy my first home when I think I was 28 in California. And that was at a time when real estate prices were appreciating, very rapidly. And that turned into the next home. And the reason I was able to do that, it was because I had saved enough through these retirement accounts that I had, what I needed to be able to get my foot in the door on owning that first home. And then it's compounding interest, right? So once you're midlife, where my family is now, it looks a lot different in terms of its earning potential and how rapidly those investments can grow. And also part of like going back to the company story, being intentional about where you're going and what kind of potential equity benefits that you get from companies that you joined. Some of the best advice I've gotten as a woman is, never be afraid to ask for what you're worth. And I think as women, we often, we just feel grateful that we're given an opportunity or grateful that we're given an offer, and we don't think to counter. We don't think to ask for more. We don't think to, what is the going rate for this position? Whereas men will just ask for 40% more without even thinking about it, right? Like, it's a much more emotional process, I think, for women. So know your value and don't be afraid to push back and to ask for that. But yeah, I think just being smart with your finances, and then talking about investing in the stock market. I do a lot of my own investments. We do work with financial planners and these types of things as well now that we're older and have a family. But I taught myself all of that stuff. So it's not something you learn in school. It's not something that someone's going to teach you necessarily. So buy some books. I would watch a lot of CNBC, which sounds kind of silly, but I was just trying to learn what I could, and it's paid off to some extent. So
heck yeah. That's awesome. Yeah. I love that. People hear me often talk about Jordan Peterson, and so I'm a huge fan. But he even talks about the pay gap between the sexes, right, men and women, and all the confounding elements that go into that. And he talked about, even in his practice, he would coach women up, because generally speaking, right, men could be a whole lot more combative, where women were dominated the nursing programs, because they just had more of a heart, right? Care more about people. Guys generally care more about things, which is kind of funny, which is probably why we fight a little bit, right? But he was coaching women up essentially how to negotiate that, and to all right, if that's a goal, we got to understand this is how the market is made, essentially. And I really appreciate that, because there are negotiating tactics. There's a way we can go fight for more and exercise it and get it. And I love it, especially because we talk about this NIL stuff, right? We both have young girls, and I get excited when these things are going on, because my girl's, she's tall for 9 years old, and I'm like, yes, we got the Caitlin Clarks, and we got the girls that are setting the stage for my girl to get paid.
The worst they can say is no, and you've got nothing to lose, right? When you push back and ask for what you believe you're worth. But it takes courage. I think it's hard for women in general, but it's just something that you have to do.
Heck yeah. That's awesome. Well, look, I'm thankful for you, thankful for Josh, and you guys having like providing an excellent example of what it is to be a family, but still be able to go get what you want.
Yeah.
And so, thank you so much for coming on.
Thanks, Corey. Appreciate it.